Hungarian goulash is yet another example of a beautiful classic recipe that's died the death of 1,000 cuts. Well, at least outside of Hungary. Most Americans think of goulash as a thickened, gummy gravy with cheap, tough meat that's dumped over boiled noodles, as in a cafeteria lunchroom. Obviously, that's not why goulash became the national dish of Hungary. And true, authentic goulash is not poured over pasta. A special pasta called CSIPETKE is cooked into it, and I'll show you how to make those here. Now, traditionally, goulash is cooked over an open fire, but I've provided a good working solution to that. This is nothing like any goulash you have ever tasted before outside of Hungary. Good. Paprika is the key to this dish, of course, so I'm adding about 2 tablespoons of hot paprika to this. 1 tablespoon of coarse salt. And half a tablespoon of ground black pepper. Give it a quick mix here. This meat, a typical Russian mystery meat, it's I think it came from around the ribs, but I'm not entirely sure because they don't label things here. It's just like beef. Some kind of beef. And because they cut it up in a strange way, it doesn't match any cuts. Most of the time it doesn't match any cuts in any other part of the world. So just looking at it, I think it's like some kind of short rib beef, but you have to kind of judge by the fact that the important part is that it has some striations of fat and connective tissue in here. You don't want it too dry, and you don't want it fatty. You don't want it soaking in goo when it's done either. So this is absorbing almost all the paprika. This is a lot of paprika on here, as you can see, and there's still some more in the bottom, but that's okay. Now we're going to fry this. And once the pan is hot, I'm going to add enough oil here to cover the entire bottom of the pan. Don't worry about it having too much, because we're going to strain this off later anyway. The pan's heating up. I'm going to prepare the vegetables. I've got the onions and the celery here. You can cut them in large pieces because it's going to cook for a long time. And I've got a whole head of garlic. I'm just going to go down in the middle right here. And this is our vegetables. I'm not putting carrots in this. It's almost a mirepoix because there'll be so many carrots added later, so we're not going to add. The meat goes in. This is like some of the times you've seen the brown meat where we want to get it like almost black. In this case, we want the paprika to go into the oil, and we want to make sure that there's basically no bacteria alive on the outside of the meat. So I'm only really going to cook this for 3 or 4 minutes here, because this is going to cook for a long time at a low temperature. So if we started out with meat that has bacteria on it, the whole thing will be toxic by the time we're done. So it's important to brown it in some oil first, kill off anything that's in there, so that the prolonged cooking time at a low temperature doesn't turn it toxic. Okay, now that this went in, actually I'm going to onions, celery in there, along with the rest of the spice. And I'm actually turning. And here's the meat in the braising dish. And put the vegetables over the top of this. And I did not put the garlic in there, so I'm going to put the garlic over here now. Just around the edges. Looks pretty good. And this gets sealed up and start the braise. Now, because of the very long braise time, what I've done is I've taken a piece of parchment paper, baking paper, and put in there as an extra layer, extra precaution to make sure steam really stays in there. Finally, after cook time is up, there we go. Meat's tender. We'll let this cool down just a little bit, then we're going to lift it out of there, separate the meat from the liquid, and strain the liquid off. And here we have the meat that's been removed. And strain this into a fat separating pitcher. As you can see, there's two layers, so you'll be able to pour the broth off and discard the fat. And there's the layer of fat you can see. Have our vegetables here we're going to use for the soup. I've cored these tomatoes. I'm going to put a little X on them, and I'm going to remove the skins from these, make them into concassé. It's not traditional, you know, Hungarians don't bother with this, but I don't like bits of tomato skin sticking in my teeth, so I'm going to get rid of them. And you should already know how to do this, but just in case, you put them in hot water for about 30 seconds and then chill them in an ice bath. And here we have 8 seconds later. Pull them out, stick them in the ice bath, and then they can be peeled easily up to. And now we're basically ready. I've got these tomatoes that are peeled. I've got a yellow bell pepper. It's important to use yellow for this. This is the best kind of pepper you can get outside of Hungary for this soup. Some carrots, onions, sweet paprika. Started out with hot paprika for the meat. I'm going to use sweet paprika in the rest of the dish. I've got caraway seeds here. This is in an unusual bottle that enables you to grind them up into a very fine powder. If you don't have this sort of bottle, and you probably don't, you can use a spice grinder, but you'll need to grind your caraway into a fine powder. And then also I'm going to use rendered pork fat for cooking this, which is the tradition in Hungary for this dish. I know a lot of people are squeamish about using rendered fat, but consider that it has less saturated fat than butter, and it has no trans fats. As long as you rendered it yourself, there's no trans fats in it at all. So it's actually healthier than butter, and it'll bring some taste to this dish. The pork fat is hot. I'm going to add the onions and start sauteing these for a minute before I add the paprika. Now that the onions have brought the temperature of the oil down a little bit, I'm going to add this paprika. This is best quality, organic, Hungarian sweet paprika. This is not the cheap stuff. This isn't the time to use cheap paprika because the flavor of this entire dish is based on the paprika. So it has to be really good quality. After about 3 minutes, I put the heat on 6, by the way, out of 1 out of 10. So the paprika has been cooked sufficiently at this point. And now I'm going to add the tomatoes and that yellow bell pepper that I diced up. And we're going to cook this for a few minutes. I actually turned up the heat a little bit to 7 during this cooking time. It's been about 4 or 5 minutes now. You can see it's now dry on the bottom. Now I'm going to add the caraway to this. And I'm adding wine to this, but I understand that some Hungarians take exception to this, and they say it shouldn't have it. You know, it's the hotel chef in me. I'm going to add 3 ounces, 90 milliliters of red wine to this, and I'm going to cook it again to reduce this down to where it's almost a syrup before we continue. Okay, then 4 or 5 more minutes, and as you can see, when you wipe it, it's pretty dry. That's the point we're looking for. Now, if you tasted it up till now and you wonder, well, it doesn't have very good flavor, it doesn't have very strong flavor, it's because there's virtually no salt in this part yet. Now, I'm going to add that liquid that we strained off of the meat that was cooked.
If you don't have a liter of beef stock on hand, you want to save yourself some time, use a liter of water and one of these Knorr brand beef stock pot gels. Don't use canned beef stock though.
And the carrots. Now, we're going to begin simmering this at a low heat. I'm turning the heat down from 7 down to 4. And we're going to simmer this quite slowly. I'm not going to add the meat yet because the meat is already soft and very tender. In a traditional normal goulash, you would have the meat going in here as well because it needs a long simmering time. But we already took care of that. That meat is plenty tender. So if I put that in now, it's just going to turn into goo. So we don't want to do that. We want to keep the meat as pieces you can actually see and taste in it. So we're just going to cook the rest of this right now. Cook it down. Yeah, it's going to simmer for quite a while. While the soup is simmering away, we have to make the CSIPETKE, the traditional pasta that goes into it. So I've got 100 grams of flour here. I'm going to add about half a teaspoon of salt, and an egg, and then process this to make it into a dough. Once the dough comes together, wrap it up with cling film, as is so often the case with doughs, and refrigerate it for at least 15 minutes, but we got plenty of time while the soup cooks. And the soup's been in there for about just over an hour now, so I'm going to start making this CSIPETKE, actually about an hour and 15 minutes. So this is our dough that rested in the refrigerator. In Hungary, this is a task that children are usually given to do, so don't feel intimidated by it, because it's really not important exactly how well you do it. Just kind of flatten it out to about a centimeter or so. And I'm going to put some flour on a plate here. This is ridiculously simple. And it's not at all expected to be precise. You just tear off pieces like this to like little bean-sized pieces. They don't have to be exact. There's no right or wrong here. That's what you do. You just keep tearing off little pieces and you fill the plate. Okay. And after about 10 minutes, you end up with a plate full of these CSIPETKE. I tell you, after you do this one time, you have a new appreciation for the virtues of child labor for doing this, because anybody can do it, and it's very time consuming. Okay, now we turn our attention to the meat again. These pieces were left to chill for several hours now in the refrigerator. Now, some people like large pieces of meat in it. It's up to you. Traditionally, you want it about this size, quite small. You might end up with veins like this, of this connective tissue that's not especially soft. You know, take it off and taste it. If this isn't soft, don't use it. Just get rid of it. You want this to be delicious and mouth-watering, not chewy and nasty. The soup has now been simmering for exactly 1.5 hours. For the record, I've got 300 grams of this meat. It's about 11 ounces, something like that. Okay, the soup has been, soup goulash, has been brought back up to a simmer now with a slightly higher heat. You can see the bubbles forming. Now I add the CSIPETKE to this. Now it has to cook for about 5 more minutes at least for this to be for these to be cooked through and soft. But really, it's better if it cooks a little bit longer. It'll help thicken it up. The traditional Hungarian cooks this exactly 5 minutes from what I've seen, and then they call it done. I like it cooked a little bit more. I want that flour to be worked through and cooked as much as possible. After about 5 minutes, they do float to the surface, and I'm going to add a couple teaspoons of fresh herbs in here. I've got mostly parsley. There's a little bit of dill and a little bit of thyme in there. You can use what herbs you like. Parsley is probably the most traditional. Dill is probably not traditional at all, but I like it in there. So, you know, suit yourself. I'm going to, like I said, because these have a lot of flour on them, and I don't want a raw flour taste in here, and I do want the soup to be thicker. This goulash, you know, for Hungarians, it's like a soup for them. I like it a little bit thicker. I'm not part of that culture. So I'm going to let this continue to simmer for, maybe another 5 or 10 minutes, and let it thicken up a little bit more. Also look for my cocktail book, Cocktails of the South Pacific and Beyond, Advanced Mixology, available through Amazon online.